Hi everyone, today we are making a podcast with Aysu Basri Akter and it's related to the World Freedom Day. So we're going to discuss the freedom of press in the world nowadays. How are you today?
Thank you very much. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. First of all, I would love to ask you, for how long do you work as a journalist?
Actually, I'm working as a journalist for more than 20 years. Just after the graduation, I start with radio and then television and also with the newspaper as well, with one of the biggest media institutions in North Cyprus. And from then I'm working, but nowadays I'm working as a freelance journalist.
In your opinion, what have changed for these 20 years in the field of journalism?
Technology, first of all, because I was remember that when I was a young reporter, it is very hard to find even a landline to connect to the headquarters and send something from especially abroad. Once I was in Brussels, for example, and I catch a very important interview with the President of the European Parliament. It was a very important news, and our editors wanted to publish it in the morning paper. But even in Brussels in 2004, it was very hard to find a good internet connection for sending photographs and the text. And I was remembering that I find a fine fax and send my photographs. And also I wrote my story with handwriting and send it via fax. It was a kind of nightmare, but today it is quite easy to reach the source, send your information to anywhere else. More cheaper, the technology is much more affordable now. For example, I was remembering that all the cameras and the microphones are very huge and very heavy, but today even with your smartphone you can do a very good job. For example, in 2018 I was in Crans-Montana to monitor the Cyprus peace negotiations within the leaders, and in 12 days, I just used a tiny smart microphone and my smartphone, a very good internet connection, and I did several live broadcasting. So in 20 years, especially the developments in technology create a good opportunity for all of the journalists.
Mm-hmm. If we started to talk about technology, so how technology influence the freedom of press nowadays in modern world? Because when we have all this equipment nearby and the civilian journalism also very developed nowadays, how does it change the field of freedom
Actually, the freedom of the press, freedom of journalism is unfortunately an issue in the whole world, even in more democratic countries. But it changes, depends on the cases. But we are, especially nowadays, feel that we are not working so freely, actually. We feel very deep impacts of some pressures from the governing bodies. But technology gave us several advantages. For example, maybe 20 years ago and even 10 years ago, you couldn't, or it was very hard to reach alternative sources quite easily. But today it's much more easy. And you don't have to just rely on the official sources. You can search much more easily, and you can find and connect several other sources within the whole world in a couple of minutes. So these are advantages, but especially the development of technology creates the huge power of the online media and online broadcasting, and this creates sometimes ethical issues, because everybody can be a journalist, or everybody assumes as if a journalist. So they can create several defamation, they can create unethical aspects of an issue. These are the disadvantages. But technology generally gives us a great opportunity to use our voice and to connect the several sources. If a journalist, for example, feel a threat, a kind of threat coming from anywhere, can contact much more easily to several non-governmental organizations or journalism organizations within the world, and we can aware much more easily and faster than past in any case, in anywhere in the world, and it's a huge advantage, I think.
So, firstly, you mentioned that nowadays freedom of journalism is a big issue in the world. So can we say that the last tendency which we see in the field of journalism is tightening the policy towards the, let's say, making the space less freedom and giving less space for voice, for free voice of journalists all over the world?
Actually, the pressures creates a kind of auto-censorship, and it is much more dangerous, especially for a journalist, than the censorship itself. Because when you feel a kind of threat, you just start to control yourself, not to maybe investigate that case, not to write that story. And it is the worst thing, because in other case, you are trying to do something, you are trying to dig deep, investigate, and try to write your story. Even your editors decide not to publish it, you can try this is a censorship. But if you decide not to write that one or not to investigate that case, it is an auto-censorship, and it is much more dangerous, because this also make the other people not to talk or prevent to discuss. Also affects the other journalists not to talk or not to defend any journalists have any threat or have any issue with the governing bodies. And actually this is not good, and nowadays, not nowadays only, but especially from maybe 5–10 years, we feel that pressure much more than the past.
Mm-hmm. We mostly talked about tendencies all over the world, but I also want to discuss with you the case of Turkey and North Cyprus. Mm-hmm. For example, if we are talking about Turkey, so there is a research made by Reporters Without Borders, non-profitable organization, and in 2022, the rate of Turkey in the world list was 149 from 180, and today it's 165 from 180. And if we're talking about Cyprus, it's 76 from 180 today, and it's on 5 points more than previous year.
Actually, I think these results are coming only from Cyprus Republic, not covering the north. I'm not sure, but as I know, it's only covering the south part of the island. But such kind of reports generally evaluate several aspects, not only the freedom itself, but also the social and economic conditions of the journalists. And we know that especially Cyprus is quite good in that manner. Journalists can earn good salaries and can reach good insurances and some opportunities. But in North, it's a bit difficult and worse than the South, because of the economic conditions, especially the media institutions pay less, especially to the young journalists. And many journalists had to work without any insurance or without any legal rights, and this also creates a kind of unfreedom, because you couldn't do your job properly, you couldn't develop your proficiency, so maybe you will quit. Or you can maybe be under some impacts from other economic powers. Somebody can pay you much more easily, and you can write or do anything else according to your conditions. So it can destroy all of the ethical and universal values. In Turkey, it's really surprising, but I think maybe it can be related about the economic conditions. Despite of the bad economic conditions in Turkey, nowadays there is a kind of one-man show in the media sector in Turkey. In several countries, for example, a business person couldn't buy all the broadcasting institutions. They have some limited percentages of the ownership, and it should be a transparent. But in Turkey and even in Cyprus, especially in North Cyprus, these ownerships and the ownership relations are not transparent. This can create some journalists a little bit good economic conditions, but actually in the universal values it's not good, because it creates a one-man show, and everybody say the same thing, and everybody broadcasts and discuss the same thing, and a public couldn't get a proper information. They can get only the thing that the owners want them to believe in, or want them to decide. So the ownership in media also should be transparent. But in any way, all these evaluations shows us that Turkey is a very bad condition, because we already know that there are several journalists in jail just because of doing their profession. Most of them have no any case process, but they are just doing their job, and they can be sent directly to the jail. And even some universal values or legal conditions, it couldn't be changed yet, unfortunately.
But in the field of Cyprus journalism, do we have some, let's say, pain topics?
Of course, especially the relationships with Turkey and the criticizing of the president is not so easy, even in journalism, because North Cyprus have its own special conditions. For example, in every country have their own private broadcasting line and channels, but in North Cyprus we don't have. Our television channels have to pay a license fee to Turksat in Turkey in order to broadcast, even in locally, because Turksat is an universal broadcasting channel, international, and if you decide to broadcast internationally, you can pay your license, you can pay your fee, and broadcast internationally. But if you are a local broadcasting station, and if your target audience are just locals, you don't have to an international broadcasting channel. You don't have to pay huge monies. But unfortunately, we don't have our digital broadcasting channels, so we have to pay to Turksat in order to broadcast even locally. And all these license fees are very huge amounts according to the economic conditions of the broadcasting channels. From several years, all the governments decided to pay all these fees in the behalf of the private TV channels as well. But last year they changed their minds, and our two private TV station couldn't pay their fees, and they can only broadcast online now. The regulations that they signed with Turksat is quite actually threatening, because they can lose quite easily their broadcasting line because of any criticism about the nationality or the religious issues or the governing issues. And it is also prevent the freedom of the press, because it's not so easy to be on air in such circumstances.
I also heard that in 2022 Cyprus authorities tried to develop the law about banning unwanted and unpleasant news on internet, like digital news.
Yeah.
I don't know the current situation with this law, but what do you think if Cyprus authority will continue to this kind of policy? What kind of future in the field we're gonna face?
Actually, maybe the regulation itself can be a good regulation if it didn't consist of some general sentences, because it can be used according to the standing point of the governing bodies. Because we know that defamation is an issue, and we should do something for it. But while trying to create a field for all kind of freedom, and trying to prevent defamation and illegal or unethical circumstances, we should also protect the rights of the freedom of journalism. So maybe there are some points should be changed in that regulation. There are some cases about this regulation, but they were not journalists. Actually, they were some online broadcasters, but just because of the criticizing or using some words considered consist of defamation, have some cases, but nobody in jail.
You talked before about license for media and ownership in media in Turkey and Cyprus. I feel that it's an issue nowadays for commercial media. So at the same moment, journalists and media houses need to earn money. At the same time, they need to provide trustful and real information.
Actually, it is one of the most difficult issues in journalism, because not only the governing bodies, also the economic power can affect the freedom of the press or freedom of the broadcasting. And the journalism revenue depending mostly on the commercials. And in North Cyprus, we have another disadvantage that generally almost all the commercial subjects are imported from Turkey. So we can also watch, for example, Turkish televisions quite generally. We read Turkish newspapers. We don't have any language difference. And such powerful, economically powerful bodies with a very economic power also create another disadvantage for the local media, because you couldn't be compete with them because you are not producing your own subjects and materials that you can create a commercial value. You are just making advertisements for the goods coming from Turkey, and all those advertisements, online or traditional media, are already have in the Turkish media channels. So it creates another huge disadvantage, and that's why that the economic power is not so strong in North Cyprus in the media.
Some people say that being journalist in Cyprus is quite boring. Can we really say that?
Oh, it depends actually what you are expecting from your job. Of course, in a metropole or in a big city, can create much more attractive stories. But in Cyprus, here is a quite small island, and almost everybody knows everyone, so each other. Sometimes we can lose our excitement. Yes, it is true. But I think here in the news stories and the journalism generally it takes their excitement from the local politics, and especially the Cyprus issue, because there is no any negotiation process now, but there is an issue still there, and it affects in both sides in Cyprus. So for both media companies, I mean in North and South, it is the most newsworthy issue. Sometimes the excitement rates are high, especially in the peak dates, but sometimes generally we don't have a very huge topics. But especially from 10 years, Cyprus as a whole is a quite good field for investigative journalism, because the human trafficking, money laundering, and all the other black issues, using the island as a kind of transit line. So there are several big stories hidden behind some small stories. This creates a good source for the young journalists, especially for the investigative journalists.
For young journalists and for students, I think it seems like we all want to work in big cities, in big media houses, to cover great stories and be famous all over the world. But I also think that it's important to show the importance of local journalism. And for you, why local journalism, like for example in Cyprus or your hometown, is important?
Actually, when just after the graduation, I just start the biggest media company in North Cyprus, and after a few years later, I had an offer from Turkey, from a very good private TV channel, but as an idealist and very young journalist, I really believe that if you are a journalist, you can do your job in your hometown much more effectively, because you know all the fields, the background stories are very familiar for you. You can reach all the sources much more easily. For example, as a young journalist, as a foreigner journalist, for example, doing your profession in New York is not so easy and compete with all the other locals or all the other professionals. But in your hometown, sometimes it can be much more easy, and it's also easy to develop yourselves, to entertain and to train yourselves, because in journalism you have to know that, or you have to accept that you are always a student. You have to learn something every day, in every minute, because you don't have to know everything, of course, but you have to know something about everything. So being a foreigner in a capital is quite difficult than being a local in your hometown.
Also, there is the issue of source protection. And as I know, in Cyprus and in Turkey, we don't have any laws to protect journalism, journalist sources, and why it's a real threat for the field.
Actually, yes, we really need some new regulations about, especially according to the new circumstances in Cyprus. In several countries, there are some special regulations to protect the sources, but we don't have. But while we don't have directly regulations, we can use some other core regulations according to some other legal cases. But we have to work much more on journalism and the freedom of journalism, freedom of expression in Cyprus. Until now, we had very worst cases. One journalist was killed in 80s. Just before his house, just because doing his job, and nobody go to jail, or the case is covered and closed quite easily, even all the efforts of the other journalists or journalist organizations, and of course the family. We couldn't have any result about that case. There are some physical threatening issues, and we couldn't also solve those cases. Maybe the journalism organizations should be concentrate a little bit more about the legal regulation sides, of freedom of expression, not only protecting the sources, but also protecting the expression rights of the media as well.
As I know, a couple of months ago you also went to Europe for the parliament meeting to observe it. So if we're talking about Europe field, it seems like it's a freedom space, but till some point when you understand that actually here we also have some issues.
Actually, I went to Strasbourg and Brussels in a month for monitoring the plenary parliament session in Strasbourg, and in Brussels we have some several meetings with some media professionals and organizations, because nowadays European Parliament is working on a new regulation about the freedom of expression and freedom of the press, freedom of the media. Before that visit, I really believed that it would be very easy to cover that, and every member country will be a very good pro for that regulation. They will support, and it will be legalized in a very short time period. But we unfortunately discovered very surprisingly that many democratic countries are not supporting the regulation because everybody have a case about the journalism and the media. And even in more democratic countries, the governing bodies are very reluctant to support the new freedom regulations, because according to those regulations, for example, it will be very, very hard to issue the case against a journalist, and judges can only reject to see that case, for example, if it is really related about journalism. And this only this topic can create a great space for freedom of the media. But for example, we know that Germany, France, Spain are very reluctant to support that regulation. But we are just trying to get some support and produce some more inside views for those kind of regulations as just a journalist, because as a Cyprus we are the member of some international organizations, and we are really supporting every regulation that create a space for the media freedom.
What kinds of advice to future journalists you can give?
Actually, journalism is a very exciting job, exciting profession, but our young friends should decide how they can live, how they want to live, in what conditions, because you have to decide that you will be, most probably you will not live in a luxurious life, and you will work according to 24 hours, 7 days, because you are always journalists, even you are in a holiday. especially the holidays are the most important working days. So you know that you will work very hard. Maybe you will not earn huge monies, but you will also know that you will discover several different worlds. Maybe many of the people couldn't discover so easily. You can learn every day new things. Especially if you can speak several languages, it will be very advantageous for you to reach the sources, because it is very important to read something in its original, not the translation scripts. So if you can speak several languages, it will be a very good advantages. You can travel everywhere in the world. You can reach several sources quite easily, and you can do more. As a journalist, actually, you will not have a boring life. But always and generally have a little bit difficult life.
Thank you for this conversation. It was really nice to talk with you.
Thank you so much.
I hope see you soon.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you.